do some garlic. First things first, I'm drinking water. All right. I'm going to begin with a short recitation of the refuge prayer in English. You can join in your heart and in your mind by thinking that you dedicate this session to all sentient beings. In the Buddha, his teaching, and the order most excellent, we take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may we attain Buddhahood for the sake of all that lives. In the Buddha, his teaching, and the order most excellent, we take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By merit of generosity and other good deeds, may we attain Buddhahood for the sake of all that lives. In the Buddha, his teaching, and the order most excellent, we take refuge until enlightenment is reached. Through the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may we attain Buddhahood for the sake of all that lives. A short prayer in Tibetan. Ora paden sawe lama rinpoche, dagi chiwo pede den shula, kadun jempo kone jesunte, kusum toking udrup saudu so. Basically asking for the blessing of the lamas and to bless us with their body, speech, and mind. So thanks, everyone. So here we are after the journey of studying this book, the aspirational prayer of Mahamudra, of the definitive meaning, by the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje, using the commentary by Trungpa Rinpoche. We have journeyed through this book. There are 25 verses of this amazing prayer that was written by the third Karmapa to inspire us and to teach us about the Mahamudra path. And so all of the verses that we have covered thus far have talked about the accumulation of merit, the purification of negativity, and also the three the three prajnas of hearing, contemplating, and meditating. It's talked about the view, the meditation, and the action of Mahamudra, and so on. And now we're in the very last section of the book. And we've just finished studying verse number 17 of 25, which is about Vipassana. And we've studied about Shamatha and Vipassana. And now we're on verse 18. I think I got that right. How does that look to you guys? Does it look like we're on verse 18? Because that's where I put my bookmark. So it says, verse number 18, looking at objects, one sees no objects, but just mind. Looking at mind, there is no mind. It is empty of nature. Looking at both of these, clinging to duality is self-liberated. May we realize the true nature of luminous mind. So what we talked about in verse number 16 and number 17 are the actual practices of Mahamudra. Shamatha practice, which is called calm abiding, learning how to rest one's attention on an object, whether it's the breath or a physical object, learning how to bring the mind back again and again, the attention back again and again and again. We become familiar with developing mindfulness. And this mindfulness that we develop through the shamatha practice then gives way or opens the door to the practice of vipassana, which is explained in verse number 17, where he says, looking again and again at the mind itself, which cannot be looked at. One sees clearly just as it is, the truth of not seeing. In other words, one can progress from shamatha practice to being able to take the mind itself as the object of meditation. In shamatha, we use the breath, for example, as our object of awareness and attention. But in vipassana, we take the experience of mind itself as the object. And so in verse number 18, we're being encouraged by the third Karmapa as you can see, the subtopic of this is penetrating to the root. In other words, we should do our shamatha and vipassana meditation so well that we have a breakthrough, so to speak, that we come to really understand what mind is for ourselves. Looking at objects, one sees no objects but just mind. And what this means is that when we think about apparent objects, which are those things out there, I often use as an apparent object my glass of water, since it's one of my friends. This is an apparent object. It's made of matter, but there's a difference between the apparent object that is here and the appearance of that apparent object in my mind. The apparent object here is made of matter, but the appearance of that object in my mind is made of mind. It is just mind. And that's what's being said in these first two verses. Looking at objects, one sees no objects. In other words, we just see the picture of this object in our minds. And then when we go to look at that mind and say, well, what is that? What color is it? What shape is it? Where does it begin? Where does it end? And so on. We don't see anything at all. It has no materiality. And when we look at both of them simultaneously, clinging to duality is self-liberated. So what he means by this is that right now, we see this object as being solid and real. But if we examine carefully, we'll see that the appearance of that object in our mind is not solid and made of matter. And if we can somehow rest our mind in this understanding, while we are experiencing an object, if we can rest in that understanding at the same time, then objects will not be a cause of grasping for us anymore. This is something that we are not used to doing. We're used to grabbing onto everything and not considering that the things we are grabbing onto might be mental experiences. And so he's inviting us, the third Karmapa is inviting us to try to think of both of these things happening at the same time. The idea of self-liberation is something we've all actually already experienced. It's not, self-liberation is not something that is only experienced by great meditators. All of us have experienced self-liberation. The last time I used the example of the telephone call. You're having an argument with someone, the telephone rings, you pick up the phone, and you become a different person when you hear your friend on the other end. In that moment, you have let go. You have liberated, in essence, the idea of I am arguing with an enemy into I am talking to a friend. So we have already, all of us, let go of things to the point that they disappeared, because that enemy disappeared when we let it go. And so all of us have experienced that moment of liberation from grasping. But it's something that happened so quickly that we didn't really make note of it. We didn't really think about it. And what he's asking us to do is to think about it and notice it. And then he says, may we realize the true nature of luminous mind. And so what he does in this on these pages is he walks us through the 4-part meditation on the nature of mind that is in this book, The Great Path of Awakening. He walks us through that. Because we are short on time, and we did cover a little bit of this last week, I'm not going to go through it in detail here, but safe to say that in this version, the 2005 edition of this book, he walks us through, Jamgon Khatro walks us through a 4-part meditation on the difference between apparent objects and appearances from pages 10, 11, and 12 of this 2005 book. So in the commentary, Trungpa Rinpoche explains these 4 parts and explains that when we look at the mind and see that the mind is the seat of experience, and then look at the mind and see there's no color, no shape, no location, that gives us more confidence that mind really is beyond what we think it is. Mind is beyond our duality. Mind is beyond all of these things. And so in the prayer at the end of verse number 18 is saying, may we realize the true nature of mind. And he calls it luminous mind. And that's because it's traditional to call the mind emptiness and luminosity. Mind is not just emptiness, it's also luminosity. In other words, the mind may not be a material thing, but it's not nothing because it experiences and knows. And so this is this empty lucidity, or this empty luminosity, is one way that we can conceive of the mind. And so he's going to go on and talk a little bit about this in the following verses. And now, does anybody have questions about this part, or are you comfortable with where we are with this? Questions, thoughts? Yes.
I hope this is not a too big question. When you mentioned the glass as the external object and the experience of the glass being the mind, isn't ultimately the glass as an external object also something made by the mind? Or what I'm getting confused about it, if it's still independently existing.
There are differences of opinion about this. There are differences of opinion about this. And I'm trying to recall where the quotation is, because I've looked at this recently. Oh, I know. It's in Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's book, in his book, Pointing Out the Dharmakaya. There are differences of opinion. So because I'm not a scholar and haven't studied them extensively, I cannot quote all of the different viewpoints. The great book by Khenpo Tsultrim Jamso, The Progressive Stages of Meditation on Emptiness, talk about the varying viewpoints and the schools of thought about whether apparent objects have any true independent existence or not. So what I tell people is, whatever school of thought you subscribe to, no matter what school of thought you subscribe to, we can all agree that whether this is here or not, or whether when we leave this room, it disappears, that whatever we may believe about apparent objects, we know that our experience of them is mental. So that's as far as I can go. But as you work with these philosophies and talk to the great scholars, Khenpo Tenkyang is a Khenpo, and that he has a doctorate in Buddhist studies, and he has studied these various philosophies and deeply, as has Khenpo Urgyen and Khenpo Sanjay. So the Khenpos can explain this part of it to you. All I can do is explain the part that has to do with the mind. So I'm sorry, that's as far as I can go, but I'm hoping that this has piqued your interest and that you'll go on to study more about this. But here's what I would say. I would not go play in traffic and say, oh, those cars aren't real. Those cars are made of my mind. I would not do that. I would actually stand at the corner, wait for the cars to go by, and then cross the street. I just, I don't want to have any accidents happen. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I'm sorry, I can't give an exhaustive answer on that.
I know, I understand it's probably a super complex.
But I'm glad you asked, because it gave me the opportunity to show you the sort of the limitations of my knowledge. But what's interesting is that in the book Vivid Awareness, Trungpa Rinpoche says, you know, you could describe the mind in detail in philosophy, or you could just meditate and experience it for yourself.
Mhm.
You know, he says it's not necessarily, mind is not necessarily something that can be explained, but it can be experienced.
Mhm.
And so he encouraged, in the book, he encourages
Mhm.
this. So, other things to talk about.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And if you're Milarepa, then you can go ahead and play in traffic, and it's not a problem, right?
Right. Yeah. Milarepa can do that.
The
Because
things
he,
at that level, things are a little different.
yeah, this is true.
Mhm.
Yeah, because in fact, there's a famous story told about Gampopa, who also had the same realization. Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche liked to tell this story because it is rather fantastical. Gampopa was trying to make a point about emptiness, and he gestured with his hand toward a pillar that was next to him, and he swiped his hand right through the pillar. You know, and to the amazement of everyone. And not only did he put his hand through it, there remained an open space between the top of the pillar and the bottom of the pillar. And Khenpo Rinpoche said it remained like that for many years until the rather nervous monastics decided to fill it in with material because they worried that the roof of the monastery might collapse. But anyway, that's a story that he has told about that. But thank you for that. Well, in that case, welcome, Bruce, by the way. Hi, thank you for being here. Appreciate it. We're on verse number 19. So now on this page, which he calls the main exposition, how to practice the unity of shamatha and vipassana, because we've already learned shamatha, we've already learned vipassana, and we've already learned that if we practice them, we can, as it says in the text, penetrate to the root, meaning find out what the nature of mind is by our own discovery. So verse 19, free from mental fabrication, it is Mahamudra. Free from extremes, it is great Madhyamaka. This is also called the great perfection, the consummation of all. May we have confidence that understanding one realizes all. So now what he's done is he's actually kind of drawn us a picture of how realization arises. You practice all the preliminaries, you study the view of Mahamudra, then you start to practice Mahamudra Shamatha, Mahamudra Vipassana, you join the two together. And when you join the two together, you discover the nature of mind. And so what he's doing in this verse is he's saying that essentially, no matter what wording you use, no matter what methods you use, all of these three main methods of recognizing mind come to the same point. They result in the same awakening. And so he's giving brief descriptions of each of the three major paths that study this type of meditation: Mahamudra, Madhyamaka, and Dzogchen. Mahamudra, Madhyamaka, and Dzogchen. Mahamudra is sometimes called the Great Seal or the Great Authenticity because it's like the seal of a document. Madhyamaka means the great middle way, which is the middle path that is free from the extremes of existence and non-existence and so on. And then the great perfection or Dzogchen. And so he gives these many descriptions of their methodology here. Free from mental fabrication, that's the Mahamudra method. Free from extremes, that's the great Madhyamaka or the great middle way method. It's the consummation of all is called the great perfection. That's the Dzogchen method. So he gives these little capsule descriptions of the methodologies of the three great systems. And in the commentary, he talks about what free from mental fabrication means. He says, when we meditate, we rest in meditation on the natural state of mind. That's the methodology of Mahamudra. Moreover, this is in the first paragraph of the commentary, about halfway through. When we moreover, when we realize this and then meditate upon it, we do not think, I am doing this and I am not doing that. Therefore, it is free from mental fabrication. In other words, you don't speak to yourself about what's going on. You just try to let the mind be free from conceptuality, duality, grasping, and clinging. And so he says to rest evenly in this unfabricated nature is said to be the practice of Mahamudra. So then the great middle way is described in the second paragraph. About the middle of the paragraph, he says, it is called the great Madhyamaka or middle way because it is free from the extreme of existence, eternalism, and the extreme of non-existence or nihilism. When we understand the natural state of mind, we realize it is not existent and it is not non-existent. Since we realize that it is free from extremes, we do not fall into the extreme of eternalism or nihilism. Therefore, it's called Great Middle Way. So it's just a way of talking about their methodology. All of these describe ways of holding the mind as free from fabrication, holding the mind as free from the extremes. And in Dzogchen, the third paragraph, he says, the text says this is also called the great perfection. Dzogchen, or great perfection, means everything is perfect and everything is complete already. You don't have to turn it into something. We try to find the nature of mind and realize this by looking at our own one small mind. Since it contains everything, it's called great perfection. And so by describing these three systems, it then says, if you realize one of these, you realize them all. So the idea here is that you don't have to study all three, but if you study one of them very well, you will understand and have the realization of all three. Thus, he said, we aspire, may we have the confidence that knowing one of these is knowing them all. Any questions about this verse? Or observation? No. It's fun to know there are other ways to get to the answer than just one way. So then in verse number 20.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Can you say what again? What Madhyamaka is the great middle way. What's Mahamudra considered?
The great seal, like the seal on a document.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Because mudra has lots of different meanings, but Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said that in this particular context, it means the great seal. And there's a couple ways of thinking of the word seal, like authenticity, because he said in the old days, the monarchs would send letters and they would all have the monarch seal on it, the king or the queen, their seal would be on it and it was authentic. And so this idea of being without fabrication in your mind, what he said was, it's like great authenticity in that you are authentically experiencing your mind. Also, you will know when you have arrived at this realization, nobody has to tell you. So, so that's good to know. But in any case, and another way of looking at the seal is it's a way of sealing all of our experience with this authenticity. So that's so thanks for asking about that. Other things to talk about here. Okay. So then in verse 20, he begins to talk about the results of practice. Remember, he talked about shamatha, he talked about vipassana, then he talked about the union of shamatha and vipassana. I mean, like, how great would it be if you learned how to meditate on your mind through vipassana, and then your shamatha was so good that you could do it for as long as you wanted? That would really be good. So what happens when a person does that? And that's what's described in verse 20. Great bliss free from attachment is unceasing. Luminosity free from clinging to concept is unobscured. Non-thought beyond conceptual mind is spontaneity. May meditative experience free from striving be continuous. So Trungpa Rinpoche, in his commentary below, he says that when you practice this union of shamatha and vipassana, meditation experiences may arise for you. I remember Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said sometimes meditation experiences arise once, but then never arise again. He said, don't worry, just keep meditating. He said that all of the experiences that arise in meditation are the fruition, this was Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche saying this, are the fruition of your positive karma from the past. And so because it's the fruition of positive karma from the past, and because most of us have accumulated positive karma with some selfish motivation, like we're generous, but we think, I bet people will see how generous I am. Or they will give something to someone and then expect something in return. So because most of our virtue has a little selfishness mixed into it, when our good karma comes to fruition, he says it's like a day lily. It blooms one day and dies the next. And so he said, for meditators, he said, this can get discouraging, because he said, here you're meditating, thinking something surely is going to happen, right? And he said, then when nothing happens, you get discouraged. But he said, these experiences are mere side effects of the meditation. They are not a symbol that you're going to get enlightened in the next 5 minutes. The idea is that these things that happen, of which there are 3 types: bliss, clarity, and non-thought. Bliss or well-being, clarity or feelings of clarity, and non-thought, periods of non-thought. When you do shamatha well, these 3 things could happen. These are the 3 things that might happen. If they don't happen, don't worry too much, because they are just side effects. And because they're side effects, if you get excited, like, oh, I had a period of non-thought, wow, I must be really doing well. Then when it inevitably fades, which it will inevitably fade, don't get discouraged. It's just something that is passing. Khenpo Rinpoche said that if you get attached to a good experience, then that good experience then becomes an obstacle, because then you try to recreate it, thinking, oh, I got somewhere, something good happened, I want that to happen again. And so as a result, by clinging to a good experience, you turn that good experience into an obstacle. And the same thing happens with bad experiences, because sometimes when you meditate, you might have a negative memory arise, or something that is painful will arise. And then you'll feel, oh, my meditation is going badly, and so on. But what Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said is, he said, your job is to meditate no matter whether your experiences are good, bad, or none at all. He said, your job is to just keep meditating. He said, because if you become attached to some experiences or afraid of other experiences, you won't keep meditating. And it's the continuity of your meditation that leads to realization. So the Kempo Tsultrim Jamso once compared experiences to a signpost on an unfamiliar road. He said, maybe you're wandering in the dark and you don't know where you are, but you suddenly see a signpost and you say, oh, thank goodness, I'm going the right way. He said that these experiences of bliss, clarity, and non-thought, he said, even though they're fleeting, they are like reassurance to us. We take them as reassurance, like, oh, thank goodness, I'm on the right path. But you don't step off the path and hug the sign. Because if you do that, then you won't finish the path. You'll stop right there. And so this is why it's important to keep meditating no matter what experiences you have. So that's what this verse is about. May meditative, great bliss free from attachment is unceasing. Luminosity free from clinging to concept is unobscured. Non-thought beyond conceptual mind is spontaneity. In other words, he's explaining the impact of these. Great bliss is unceasing. The idea is that your mind is always manifesting, and it can go, you can have a mind that continues either in happiness or unhappiness, but it's still happening. Your mind is still continuously manifesting. Then, so he talks a little bit about these three experiences in the commentary. And because we're skipping through these quickly, I won't be able to talk much about it, but Trungpa Rinpoche explains each one of these in detail. So I'm sorry, does anybody have comments or thoughts they want to share?
Isn't he saying, like, we always talk about experiences as just being, temporary and don't cling to them, like you're saying.
Mhm.
But isn't he also saying for a real, high level practitioner that it becomes a different ballgame, where he said it's unceasing, it becomes continuous.
Yeah.
Not that we have to worry about that too much at this stage of the game.
Yeah, we don't have to worry about
there-
that too much.
But
at this
there
stage.
is this further
Here's
possibility.
the further possibility, and this is what Rinpoche told us when we were in retreat. He said, if you don't become attached and you just keep meditating, then experience will give way to realization.
Yeah. Mhm.
And see, and then once realization has arisen, then they will be unceasing. Okay, so that's the idea. So he said, let go of experience and just keep meditating, because that's where realization will arise. It's very interesting. Rinpoche said this to us when we were in retreat. He said, sometimes experiences happen once and then never happen again. And he said, and we actually say in Tibet, he said, we say that the monarch or the king of the best of all experiences is no experience at all, because then there's nothing to get in our way. There's nothing to cling to or be afraid of. So they say the king of all experiences is no experience at all, because he said, if you let go and keep meditating, then experience, the idea is that even if you've had no experiences in meditation, realization will still dawn for you. You don't have to have experiences in order to have realization, was his point. So I guess we're going to have to keep meditating and find out. That's the hope. Yes.
So, but my question is, in case of an experience, particularly non-thought, if I experience non-thought, then it's kind of like, I know I'm in non-thought, and then now what? Because this is, for me, it becomes, I'm in non-thought, and it seems like I should do something.
Mhm.
But
Here's what Kempo Rinpoche said to do when experiences arise in meditation. He said that when an experience arises in meditation, our job is to note the presence of it but just continue to meditate. Just continue to meditate. He said you could observe the experience, just observe it. And if it disappears, okay. If it keeps going, okay, and so on. Just observe. Because he said the minute that you dualize the situation, like I am having an experience, then he said you've just conceptualized about it, and it's stopped. It's over. You know, a friend of mine said, I had this experience, and it was non-thought. I had this experience of non-thought, and I went, wow. And I said, I got bad news for you. The minute you went, wow, you kind of blew it. You know, because you conceived of something, you see? Does that make sense? Or does that make it worse?
Well, it makes sense, but if it's non-thought, then it's not conceptual.
Well, there is something called stagnant shamatha. And this is something that you have to watch out for, because he said the difference between non-thought and stagnant shamatha is that in stagnant shamatha, there is no clarity. You're not experiencing clarity. There's no clarity of the mind. He says it's actually kind of muddy and kind of obscured. And he said you have to watch out for that. I don't have the book right here. Let me see if I can grab the book and read the entry on that. If you don't mind, it'll take me about 10 seconds to grab the book. Because the definition, I pointed it out in here. See if I can grab it.
1001, 1002,
Tearing things
1003.
down here.
Oh, that was quick.
What's that?
That was quick.
Yeah, 10 seconds. It's like less, right? Let's see if I get lucky. Because I'm only approved to teach one Mahamudra book. You know, that has instructions on how to do the practice. I'm only licensed to teach one book.
Ah.
And this is the one. So
Uh-huh.
I write all of my stuff in here.
Did the 10 seconds include looking for the book and finding the verse, or?
Well, yeah, that might take a little longer. Yeah, that might take a little longer. I just have to figure out if I wrote it in this. I'm pretty sure I did, but oh, hey, that's why Post-it notes exist. Let's see if I did it. Put it up here. And if I can't, we're just going to have to get to it another time. What I might do for you, if you think this is useful, is we'll have a final session that's just Q&A if you want, and then that way we can, you know, or just have a, you know, a wrap up. Yeah, it looks like I'm not going to be able to find that for you. I do apologize, but yeah, I didn't put a note in there. But that it was really cool to recognize that there is a difference. But he said the main difference is clarity. That that a state of stupor may look like a state of non-thought, but it lacks clarity. That was the main thing he said. So,
Which book are you looking in?
I'm looking in Pointing Out the Dharmakaya by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. However, I apologize. I don't know where in the book this is, so I'll have to find it for you.
Okay.
Because it may actually just be something I've written in the margin from another teaching and may not be in this book. It's what I do. I try to put everything in one book so that when I'm teaching from this book, I don't have to look in other books. That way it's all here. Okay. Sorry, I can't help on that. Other things before we move? Okay. So now I think I've just read, yeah, great bliss. Okay. So basically that last line in verse 20, may meditative experience free from striving be continuous. In Pointing Out the Dharmakaya, Khenpo Rinpoche talks about, actually it's the 9th Karmapa, talks about 4 things that you need to have to practice Mahamudra properly. They're called the 4 conditions. First of these is called the causal condition, meaning that you, I better look it up because if I give it wrong, then I'm in trouble. It's the first condition is having and being able to follow a teacher, a genuine instruction, a person who is authentically received the instruction and practiced the instruction and so on. The four conditions. The first condition is this, here it is. I knew I could find it. The causal condition. Oh, I see. It's a fully renounced mind is the causal condition. The teacher is the principal condition. That's the second. I think of teacher and principal as like the principal of the school. So the causal condition is having a fully renounced mind. You know, those four thoughts that turn the mind toward Dharma, precious human birth, impermanence, karma, and the defects of samsara. If you study those really, really well, you will want nothing from samsara. If you want nothing from samsara, then you can meditate well. So that's the first. The second is having and being able to follow a teacher. And it makes a difference because if you have a teacher but can't follow their instructions, you're not quite there, And so that's the second of the conditions. The third condition is called the focal condition, F-O-C-A-L, focal. And what this means is that you are focusing on or taking as your object in meditation the right thing. And here it principally means that you are not intellectualizing meditation, but rather taking the mind itself as your focus. Mind itself, not philosophy. You remember that line in the Kaju lineage supplication that says, grant your blessing that meditation is free from intellectualization. And then finally, the immediate condition, it means that you don't want anything from your meditation. In other words, not only do you not want anything from samsara, you don't want anything from nirvana. The idea is that you don't cling to either samsara or nirvana. The idea is that you don't want to have a cool experience. You're just willing to let your mind be itself and want nothing from your meditation. You don't have any ambition whatsoever in that moment of meditation. Of course, in between, we recite aspiration prayers. When we're not meditating, we recite aspiration prayers, making our aspirations, saying what we want, and having our ambitions be voiced as being bodhisattva motivation. But when we're actually sitting in meditation, just meditate. Don't want something, because if you have ambition that creeps into your meditation, then you'll be tempted to create some kind of fantasy state and call that meditation, just because you want to get somewhere. And so these four conditions, if we do them properly, then that's what the meaning of this last line is. May meditative experience free from striving. May we have these that are free from striving. In other words, we're not trying to create something. We're just letting the mind be what it is and being with the mind as it is. So thanks for that. I do go off book sometimes, but it's always for a good reason, I hope. Anyway. Verse number 21. Attachment to good meditation experience is self-liberated. The confusion of negative thoughts is pure by nature within the Dharma Dhatu. Ordinary mind is beyond accepting and rejecting loss and gain. May we realize the truth of simplicity, the Dharmata. Now, this is going to be a little tough one, but if we understand what the self-liberation of thought is, in other words, we've all done it. We've all had that telephone moment when we were able to let go of the mind and let go of a thought and have it disappear completely without remainder. And he's saying that if we can practice like that, where we can let go of everything. We can let go of good experiences. We can let go of bad experiences. If we can just continuously practice letting go of the mind and letting go of grasping, then that's what self-liberation is. You could be having a thought and then you let go of that thought and it disappears completely. And that's what self-liberation means. In other words, you're taking your attention away from the content of the thought. Oh, that's a great thought. I want that. Or, oh, that's a terrible thought. I don't want that. In other words, you take your attention away from the thought and look at the mind that's having it. Then the thought itself disappears. And that's what self-liberation means. So if we're attached to a good experience and then we let go, that's a moment of self-liberation. In other words, something good could turn into the resting of the mind, because the mind's not resting when it's grasping something. So when the mind lets go of grasping, it rests. So good experiences, if you let them go, become potentially that moment of resting, just resting. It all resolves into rest. And then some people, when they have thoughts, they chase after their thoughts with a stick, like, oh, you're bad. Thoughts are bad. Thoughts are bad. We don't want thoughts. But how would it be if you didn't get mad when you had a thought in meditation and you just let it go without commentary? And so that's what he's trying to say. The other translation, this second line is a little better, I like. He said something like it says here, the confusion of negative thoughts. I think what he's saying is the clinging to thoughts being bad is liberated in the expanse. So in other words, you don't get mad when you have bad experiences, and you don't get excited when you have good experiences. You let all of them resolve into rest. If you can do that, then everything that happens in your life could potentially wake you up. Everything. Anything that potentially could happen in your mind and life could wake you up. It could be the cause of waking up, meaning the cause of rest, letting it go. And so ordinary mind is beyond accepting and rejecting loss and gain. Ordinary mind is this basic nature that they talk about. They talk about ordinary mind. It's Tamalji Shepa in Tibetan, which I can't spell, but maybe another time when we get in, we can try to get into how you spell these things. But ordinary mind is beyond saying, I like this and I don't like that, loss and gain. In other words, just being satisfied with your mind. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, in one of his lectures, said, we are always trying to add something to the mind to make it like better, instead of just being with the mind, just letting the mind be. Letting the mind be doesn't mean that you follow all your thoughts. Letting your mind be means that you let go of all of your thoughts and let the mind rest. So we're not there yet. And if we get there, we can only stay there for a short period of time, and then we get tired. And then that's why there's we have to have no striving, because if we get tired and then we sort of fall out of rest, then we get mad and we want to do it again. And what he's trying to say is just let your mind rest. May we realize the truth of simplicity. Simplicity. Just let it be. The Dharmata. And he explains it extremely well in his commentary. Now, it looks like we are at the bottom of the hour. So guys, I'm going to read the next 3 verses and we're going to see what happens. So what he's saying here is that in verse 21 is, if you can be that person who is all right no matter what is going on because you're able to rest your mind in the midst of all experience, that's amazing. That's great. And if you can keep practicing like that, then things go well. After giving us this wow moment, the third Karmapa gives us this wow moment, this like, wow, all of my experiences could be doorways to just resting the mind in itself. Wow. I was actually explaining this verse to someone today. We were right on this verse. And when I explained it to her, she went, wow. And I said, yes, isn't that amazing? And I said, but then look what he does next. He gives you this wow moment, and then he brings you back down to earth. 22. All beings are always enlightened by nature. In other words, we all have the potential to do this amazing thing. But not realizing this, they wander endlessly in samsara. Oh man, that's depressing. May unbearable compassion arise for sentient beings who experience boundless suffering. So may unbearable compassion for sentient beings who experience boundless suffering arise in our being. So he kind of brings us back down to earth saying, look at that just wow thing. Well, guess what? Because we can't do that, we suffer. And isn't that a deep cause for compassion? So then he's asking us to give birth to compassion. So here's something that Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche said to us when we were in retreat. He said, the first level of bodhisattva awakening is called the path of seeing in the Mahayana, the 5 paths of the Mahayana, because you see your mind definitively in a way you never saw it before. And he says, after that moment, he said, you'll know when you get there, because he said, you will suddenly realize that all the meditation you did before this moment was not complete. Was like, oh yeah, it was kind of like conditional, or, maybe not the right thing. That's the first thing. And he said, but the second thing is you feel this immense compassion for everyone else who hasn't seen what you have seen. He says, you'll know when you get there, when you feel that unbearable compassion for all beings. And it doesn't stop. So he's giving us a clue here that this is where we might end up if we have realization. Then 23, verse 23, he says he calls it the energy of unbearable compassion is unceasing. The other translation says the display of unbearable compassion is unceasing, which is, I think, a little better, because when you say energy, people kind of say, ooh, is this kind of neat energy? What kind of energy are we talking about here? But really what he's meaning is that when you feel this unbearable compassion, it's like it's unceasing. The idea is that it just keeps going. This is because your mind is manifesting always. It's always manifesting. But because we like some thoughts and don't like the others, we can't just be there with that. We have to like things and dislike things. But when we feel this compassion and we look at its nature, we look at the nature of that compassion, then our realization grows and expands. And so he says, when one feels compassion, it is nakedly clear that it is free of any nature. May we keep going and meditate day and night, inseparable from this unity, the supreme unerring path. So the idea is, if you can rest your mind in itself comfortably, no matter what's going on in it, that is the cause for realization. Then verse 24, he says, through meditation, one attains the eyes and higher perceptions, ripens sentient beings, purifies a Buddha field, and fulfills the aspiration to attain the qualities of a Buddha. So now that he's talked about how realization arises and has essentially symbolically walked us through the whole process until we are at verse 23 and practicing day and night and resting in mind day and night because of our unbearable compassion, now that we've reached the first bhumi. And so he comes back to earth again, talking about the big picture. He says, all of those great things you think about, and all of this, may we attain Buddhahood. May we attain these things that we have aspired for. May we attain Buddhahood, the perfection of fulfilling, ripening, and purifying. And then finally, verse 25, through the kind, he walks us to the end of the poem and ends where he begins. So it's a circle. Through the kindness of the victorious ones of the 10 directions and their children, by the power of all pure virtue that exists, may the pure aspirations of myself and all sentient beings be accomplished just as we intend. So he takes us all the way back to the very beginning of this, where he combines the meaning of verse 1 and verse 2. Verse 1, we call on the enlightened ones and ask them to listen to us. Verse 2, we talk about the rivers, the accumulation of virtue, unpolluted by selfishness and all of the concepts. May our pure intention bring us to merge into the ocean, the victorious ones, the four kayas, the victorious ones. So he brings us all the way back to the beginning again. So we did it. We got through 25 verses. We kind of glossed through some of the verses quickly, so it's not truly complete. But, and because my knowledge is incomplete about these things, I could not explain the nuances of it. But if you continue to read this commentary, and there's also a woman on this prayer by Sitli, like during the new moon tomorrow, I mean the full moon tomorrow, and so on. This prayer will continue to teach you. The prayer itself will continue to teach you. And then you will meet with the teachers who can then actually instruct you in these meditations. It will come to pass. One of my teachers said, at the beginning, you aspire, and then you do your regular practice. And then as you aspire and do your practice, your karma will ripen as coming into contact with teachers. And from among those teachers, there will be some whose advice helps you the very most. And so that's how it comes together. We did it, guys. Sorry I kept you after school. Any last thoughts?
You did it, Lama Kathy. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. I really appreciated the way you guys listen, because I can see some head nodding. I can see some head shaking. I can see, and I'm so happy to have been on this trip with you guys. Thank you.
Oh, we're happy for you.
Thank you very
Yeah, thank you so much.
you.
I think this has been very pivotal for us to have your teachings twice a month these last few months. And I think it's been great in lieu of being with us face to face. And you know, if you have the time in December for one more session, Lama Kathy, you mentioned a Q&A session.
Not anything.
Okay, yeah, we're meeting the first 3 Thursdays of December, so you pick one that's convenient for you.
Okay.
You have one.
Yeah.
And-
Okay. I don't have